The swamps can be a dangerous place. They are not meant for human travel. That's why it's important to stay out of them and leave them undisturbed. We should never try to explore these treacherous lands. There are things living within them that are far too dangerous for human interaction. This isn't just a story. I am living proof of this encounter, and it will be a day that I'll never forget, as long as I live. Now, I was out camping with a few friends, just a few years ago. We had been going to the same spot every year, for roughly 6 or 7 years at this point. The campsite is fairly remote. It's about a mile hike through the swamps to get there. And if you don't know where you are going, you could get lost very easily and not come back alive. The area isn't exactly known for bad things, but everybody in our party has a pretty good understanding of avoiding trouble and sticking together. So, we were all in my friend's Chevy Silverado. I was in the passenger seat, and about 5 of my friends were piled in the bed of the truck. We had been driving for a good 30 minutes until we came upon a clearing in the swamp where the road split 2 ways. One road went deeper into the swamps, eventually leading to our destination, while the other led through a small town that was about an hour away. We had done both so many times over the years that everybody knew exactly what needed to be done at this point to get to camp safely. Everybody in the back of the truck exchanged high fives and cheered. We were almost to our campsite. We were almost there. It was this wonderful mutual feeling between all of us that we were so glad to be off this long ride and be where we needed to go. We knew it lurked in the murky depths of the swamp, but even then we were willing to traverse and get to our spot as needed. Getting there would give us this sense of accomplishment, even though sometimes the swamps made us feel a sense of dread and unease. On the way up here, my friends tried to tell me about the legends of the woods, and convinced me that they were just stories made up by everybody, although I never believed them. At first, they tried to convince me that whatever was within the swamps were real, and they too had seen them firsthand. So I asked them, why on earth are we going camping out in them then, if this is the case? Our conversation and chit-chatter lasted a little while longer, while we continued down the road. We noticed an old shack on the side of the road. It appeared as if it had been abandoned years ago. We could see some old furniture and what looked to be gardening supplies piled up outside, even some mild graffiti all over the walls. We didn't pay much attention. It was just something to point at and look at while we drove on by. Not long after, though, somebody in the bed of the truck noticed something else in the swamps. And this, what they noticed, was not a shack. It was a figure. And when somebody said something, everybody just kind of laughed at first, since we were already on the topic of legends and things that live in the swamps. We figured they were trying to just add to the atmosphere of the story. But after a few seconds, nobody had moved or made a sound, meaning that more of our friends in the bed of the truck had likely seen whatever this was as well. So I kind of slowed the truck down, and we all looked back to see what it was. They were right. There was something stepping out onto the path in the swamps. It was big and black, and appeared to be kind of crouching in the groves. Its eyes were like glowing red coals from a fire. It stared at us for a while, and my brain is trying to wrap around what I'm staring at. It didn't look like a person, but some sort of large animal that my brain was trying to put all the puzzle pieces together to figure out what it was. Now the truck came to a stop as we're all kind of gasping and trying to make out what it is we're looking at. This thing looked like a giant black panther, and I do mean giant. But it wasn't like any normal animal you would see. This thing was this shadow black almost, and appeared to have this wispy black vapor all around it. It was crouching down in the middle of the road now, like it was getting ready to pounce at us. And my friend who initially saw it, in a shaky voice, just says, "We can't go near that thing. We need to leave now." My friend next to me slaps me on the shoulder and says, "Go, go, go, go." So I turn and I put the car in drive and I go. And the second the car goes in drive and starts moving, this thing just disappears. Almost like a fog had just enveloped it and took it away. Now I'm speeding up from 25 to 30, 35 to 40. Even though the road is a little more primitive and not paved, I'm kind of spooked by what I saw, and I'm just trying to get away from whatever this thing is. And I feel something large, boom, on the top of our truck. Something very large had just landed on the roof of the truck. I could barely hear any other sound than everybody else's screaming, and I see the roof begin buckling under pressure as whatever was on top began to lean down towards us. I'm obviously slowing the truck down at this point, trying to process what's going on, and as I look up, we see these large sets of jaws underneath two red eyes staring back at us. And in an instant, we see a huge claw come through the metal of the roof, trying to tear apart the metal. That's when I floored it, in hopes to throw this thing off the roof. I went from about 0 to 60 in a matter of seconds, or so it felt like. And this thing goes flying off the roof into the thicket of the swamps. Trust me, whatever this large cat was, or whatever it was much larger than any lion I've ever seen at the zoo. This was something of supernatural. I throw the truck in reverse, pulling back off a little into the water. I'm surprised I didn't destroy the truck, and I rip out of there, going back the way we came, now easily doing 60, not caring that I'm driving on an older road and probably potentially destroying the axle. We drive all the way back to the fork, get out of the car and check the damage. Everyone in the back is completely shaken up, including myself and my passenger seat. The top of the truck is bent in, as if something with great weight sat on top of it and literally bent the metal in, and the tear mark in the ceiling. That something was so powerful and it was able to punch a hole and tear through the metal on top of the truck. We weren't just dealing with some big cat here. This was something none of us were prepared to ever deal with. We try to regain our wits, and all come to the conclusion that we have no idea what it was, but maybe talking about swamp legends brought that thing here. We decided after that to just go back into town and cancel our little rendezvous. Ever since my experience in the swamps many years ago, I have been having these awful vivid nightmares about meeting that creature from within the depths of the swamp. There is something else though. Whenever I think back to that night, I can't help but feel there was something else out there in the swamps with us. Something else besides that large creature. More of them were waiting off in the swamps. Something I never want to meet again or see. I saw something deep in the swamps that I can't explain to this day. I know it wasn't natural, and it certainly wasn't an animal I've never laid eyes on before. Let me explain. My family is from Louisiana. We've lived there just about all our lives. We have a pretty good understanding of the swamps and bayous in our area. My sister, however, is an avid hiker. My cousin, an expert fisherman. I know all the best places to find certain animals and plants around here. You don't have to look far. And to say I have an obsession in botanism would probably be an understatement. I guess I kind of round out with my siblings. And although it's been about 5 years ago at this point, I still think about this sighting almost every day. I mean, I'll never forget it. Let me lay it out for you. I was actually hiking with my family one Saturday afternoon, and it was earlier in the spring. We were on our way to a fishing spot, since we all enjoy fishing. But we had run out of gas, and needed to take the boat through some trails deeper into the swamp that we usually wouldn't go to. There were no trails there, so we were basically just wading through the trees, but with no one other than each other for my company. It was actually a little creepy, all the moss and trees and all those knotted roots underfoot. Even though the undertone is creepy, if you're not careful, one false move will land you in a pit of danger. Finally, my cousin stopped us before we got to the fishing spot, looking around very carefully. He stopped me and began looking around. He told me he sensed danger, so he started walking through very carefully, through some of the trees and shrubbery, looking for what appeared to be something. After what felt like around 10 minutes, he found it, a game trail. It was hard to notice at first, and I didn't look like much more than an animal's path through some plants. But once he pointed it out, I could see there was actually a lot more flat ground there than what had been before. He took off his backpack, still feeling unnervous about what was around us. I tried to calm him down and convince him that we were fine, but he just said he could sense something around us. I figured, yeah, we're in the swamps. There's alligators and snakes, and he interrupted and said, no, not that. Something else. I thought he was just trying to prank me. But anyway, he takes off his backpack, pulls out some snacks, and we eat and we wait. Sure enough, within 10 minutes of eating on the trail, he points out to me the path we're going to take. And after eating our snacks, we get up and go. And we start to hear some rustling in the shrubbery nearby. And he stops me again, pointing. Hey, do you see that large shape moving up there ahead? And I usually don't see my cousin this scared, but he was really panicked over it. And he yells out, hey, to whatever this was, hoping to both of us it wasn't some person. And the figure completely stopped and froze for a few seconds. You could see it there in the shrubbery. And so we continue on our path. After this thing completely disappears, he's on edge, I'm on edge. We go a little further, and we start to hear growling off in the swamps, all around us actually. But at first starts ahead of us, then behind us, then coming from the sides. And now my cousin, who's a lot more what I would call put together than me, starts really panicking. And at this point, he's not even trying to hide it. He's getting very nervous and shaking, saying, I told you something was going to happen. I told you we weren't alone. We need to go back now. He walks about 10 more feet, and his face turns white. He turns to me and starts pointing back now. And we both start running. After a couple of minutes, I have to stop him and say, what did you see? He's trying to catch his breath, and he just looks at me, and his eyes are so wide. I thought he was going to cry. He said he saw whatever it was that was out there. It looked like a large dog, and it had several rows of massive teeth. He said that it was waiting just beyond the path, right out in the swamps, like it was waiting for the right moment to attack us, but was staying hidden off in the brush. He just kept pulling me, saying, come on, we're not swimming today. We need to go. We need to go now. And it really disturbed me because, although I didn't see what he did, I've never seen my cousin that shooken up before. He's not the type of person to get scared like that, or startled. But for him to make something up like this is just completely out of his character. Never once growing up did he ever throw around monster stories or things that live in the woods. But my cousin is not the type of guy to just make something up like this, on a whim. And we were both really stoked about going fishing this day. It just wouldn't make sense for him to make this up. And plus, after what I saw him go through, either he went out of his way to prank me and put on the best actor's performance of the year, or he genuinely saw something that does not belong in this natural world and is hiding in the swamps and eats God only knows what. I live in Louisiana, right near the swamps. I've heard many tales of people around here, seeing strange sightings in nearby areas, just like the one I'm about to tell you. I was encountering something while I was deer hunting with my buddies in the swampland. We were actually in the middle of setting up our own stand, minding our own business, when all of a sudden, every single animal around us seemed to be spooked for miles on end. I'm telling you, we couldn't hear anything. My buddy starts scouting around to see if he can find out why the wildlife had suddenly gone silent. For those of you in this post that don't hunt, when everything goes quiet, it usually means that there's a large predator in the area. I know in the swamps that there are cougars, but other than gators, we don't have any large predators. I guess if you want to count black bear. But I'm sitting there waiting at our stand, and my buddy actually hikes back down to our truck to see if he can spot anything. And I think he was grabbing some extra supplies. which was actually the real reason why he decided to go down towards back the truck. He comes back maybe 12 minutes later, and he is white as a sheet. He comes to me and he's stuttering and kind of manic, and he says something big followed him back from the truck. I look at him strangely and say, "What do you mean something big followed you?" He's just stuttering and kind of manic and says that something really big, he couldn't tell what, but it was upright like a man and began following after he grabbed some supplies from the truck. I figured he was just having an episode or something. Maybe he didn't take his medication. After all, he does take medication for anxiety, so maybe he just saw something and was paranoid. I don't know. I remember giving him crap for it. But after he came back to the stand, we both heard some strange sounds. At first, it sounded like heavy breathing, but then we could hear the sounds of something big crunching and standing around, moving all around us. An important note is that me and my buddy were setting up a small stand in this very small clearing. I'd say probably no more than 20 feet in total. And whatever was following him must have came back, because it was standing off in the brush to our right, which is so thick that you can't see past it maybe no more than 3 to 5 feet. So whatever it was in there, hiding just beyond our vision. The only problem is, whatever was back there was easily looking at us and could probably see us and what we were doing. That's where the heavy breathing was coming from. And that's where the sounds of stomping around and moving around were also coming from. I told them, maybe it's just a bear. But he just shook his head really quick, told me bears don't look like this did. Bears also don't move on 2 legs the way this thing did. And right then, we hear this really loud, deep grunt, and our attention both turns to our right, probably about our 2 o'clock. And that's when, through the brush, we could see something really big moving around. Now, the creepy thing is, it never moved into our sight completely. It just kind of slowly remained back, hidden behind the brush. But if you were to clear that brush, whatever this thing was had to have been right there, no more than 10 feet next to the clearing. Whatever it was intelligent enough to try and want to stay hidden. And as soon as we heard that groan, I looked to my friend, and we just had this mutual moment when we look at each other and we had this understanding. I looked at him and said, "Get up in the tree stand now." He runs up there. I go follow him. I know the tree stand isn't necessarily a safety zone, but it was better than us just standing there on the ground, being completely vulnerable. And we sat there and we waited. Now, this thing paced around a little bit more, circled us a few times around the clearing, and then seemed to be really quiet, like it was waiting for us to make the next move. I should also note that on this day, we weren't actually doing any hunting. We were scouting out different spots to put different tree stands in, for when we would come back and do hunting, we would already have been set up. And we waited up there for probably a good couple hours. The only problem is, the swamps, which are usually bustling with insect noises and animals, were now again silent. They had been silent ever since this thing came around. So the fact that everything was still quiet told us that this creature never left. In fact, it meant it was probably still out there, beyond our vision, waiting for us, like it was wanting a preemptive strike. And we were not about to give it that satisfaction. I figured if we wouldn't travel together, we could make it back to the truck in just a matter of 8 minutes if we moved very quickly. My friend agreed, so we hopped down from the tree stand and we counted to 3. 1, 2. We heard movement. Off behind us. Something big, probably from before, began moving towards the clearing. 3. We both take off running, even though hunter teachings will teach you to never run from a large predator. We had no idea what we were dealing with, and our natural innate instincts took over, and we ran. If we continued on a slight jog, we would probably make it back to the truck in a matter of 8 minutes. As we're running, we could hear whatever that thing that was around the clearing following us, but not following directly behind us. No, it was staying off parallel to us in the swamps, but always far enough back that we could never see it. It made sure to keep itself concealed. and we could both very audibly hear it was something very large and heavy running on two legs the way a man would run. It wasn't a gallop. It was not on four legs. It did not sound awkward. It sounded very punctual in the way it ran, like it was something that was very comfortable running and moving on two legs. This thing followed us all the way back to where the truck is, but never tried to show us what it was. It never jumped on the trail and never grabbed any of us. We made it back to the trail just in time, because our truck was right there. We quickly threw our equipment in the bed and jumped in the truck. And as we're starting the truck and beginning to drive off, we can hear whatever this thing was chasing us again right off in the woods, no more than 20 feet away from us, hidden, concealed by the thick swamp brush. And now it began screaming. It sounded like this horrible guttural scream, like if you took a man and tortured him and brought his pitch down really low. It was just furious, and we heard stomping around and breaking of branches. We knew that the only way we were for sure going to be safe is if we got out of there and hightailed it. This was a few years ago now, but my buddy and I have been very, very scared from this. He thinks it was a Bigfoot, but I don't believe in Bigfoot, but I do believe it was something that we normally don't come across. In fact, since this little rendezvous, I have not been back to this exact location, although he has, as well as the surrounding area. While he hasn't encountered this thing, whatever animal this was, he has seen some strange things and markings in the swamps around the area, because he has still set up stands and other things within the 3 to 4 mile radius, and says he has found saplings and trees twisted and torn and kind of weaved together, something nobody would come out here and do. He even found some trees that were pulled and weaved together that would take immense strength, more than any human could possess. He believes they are territorial markers by this Bigfoot. I don't know what to make of it, but I will say that it's freaky, and I refuse to come back out to this spot. And he tells me sometimes he always feels like he has to look over his shoulder, like that thing is going to be there waiting for him, watching him, whatever he does, wherever he goes. He even told me he found one cypress tree that had these massive claw marks all the way down it. The claw marks started at about 11 feet up and went all the way down. He knows bears and he knows bear markings. After looking at it, he said these claws were much larger than a bear's. So being 11 feet up off the ground, we know that that is certainly not an alligator. What's larger than a bear that would do that? It makes me shudder to think about sometimes. I just hope him and I don't have another run-in. You have to be careful if you're out in the swamps, especially during the evening or night. That's when things come out to feed, and that's when you could really put yourself into a very vulnerable situation. But if you can see these things coming, it's a lot easier to get out of there, alive. I've heard a lot of strange stories about the swamps, and how it seems to be alive, almost. Of course, I'm skeptical, but after what I've seen and heard, well, you can't just write those things off as being from somebody's overactive imagination. This is my first time writing about some strange encounters that me and my friends have had over the years. I wasn't sure if I should post here or on the paranormal forum, but it seems like this would be better suited for what I'm about to tell you. Anyway, one of the encounters was somewhat recent, back in November of 2016. This happened on a few acres of land that's part of our family's farm, down south right around Louisiana. I'm also not too familiar with the locations of towns, so please excuse me. To begin, both my friend and I are still 16 at the time, so it'll probably help you guys to understand this story more clearly, since we're also beginning to find ourselves interested in things that most people our age wouldn't believe, or just simply be far too afraid to talk about. My friend and I have always seemed to be interested in the paranormal. We decided to do a little research on a few places around town that were supposed to have some recent hauntings. One of those places was supposedly an abandoned hospital, which used to be run by nuns back when it first opened during the early 20th century. At least, that's what my mom told me. Anyway, this place was straight up abandoned, and there were rumors going around that this place was held hostage by evil spirits from the other side. We thought for sure that if any of these stories had any lick or shred of truth behind them, maybe we could actually track down some of the spirits and get them to show themselves on camera. Well, we thought it'd be best if we got there around dusk, since it's supposed to be when the most haunts reveal themselves. Or at least, that's what they say. So here we are. We get out of my friend's red Camry and begin walking toward this abandoned hospital. The place had seen better days. It was kind of crumbling to pieces, not to mention it had vines and all sorts of thick shrubbery and brush everywhere. It kind of reminded me something out of Silent Hill, to be honest. Anybody into urban exploration would probably find this not so inviting. But maybe to many, that's the appeal. Mostly everything was boarded up on the outside. Windows, doors. But one of the side doors was actually torn open, and that's where we were able to enter in. The second you enter in, you could tell this place had not seen human interaction in a very, very long time. Everything was overgrown, overtaken by the swamp, covered in graffiti and garbage, dirt, and other brush that had overtaken the building. We began walking around and exploring. One thing my friend and I noticed right off the bat was that this place had this awful stench, this terrible musty odor of BO, death, and swamp. It was just a stink. Luckily for us, while we didn't bring cameras like we had wanted to, we had actually forgot our GoPros. We had our phone flashlights, which would be suffice enough to get us around the area. It was pretty dark in here, with everything being boarded up, and only slivers of light peering through the boarded up windows. We continued to walk and shine our phone flashlights around. Nothing much but old hospital beds, graffiti and dirt, and some garbage here and there. We walked around a bit on the first floor, the floor that we had came in on. Although very large, there wasn't a whole lot to see. The entire place felt very creepy, but we didn't sense anything evil or feel any ghosts or evil spirits. I think we were more just hyped up on adrenaline and excitement upon entering in here. When we'd have moments where we'd stop talking and just listen to everything around us, it was pretty quiet. It's not like we could hear anything moving around. That's probably a good thing. So we continued on walking on the first floor, and we came upon a large set of stairs, which turned out from the main map appeared to be the lobby. We would go up the second set of stairs and enter into the second floor. There was also a third floor. We explored around a bit on the second floor, found some pretty interesting things. We spent probably about another hour just checking out the second story. It was all pretty much the same. Animal droppings, garbage, graffiti, dirt, old rusted hospital beds, and miscellaneous supplies. Again, no ghosts, no evil spirits, no creepy white figures with large black mouths and eyes, not like in the movies. We were starting to feel a little disappointed on our supernatural paranormal hunt. We should have done an EV session, in my opinion. My friend suggested that we go and check out the third floor. So, why not? We had already come out here, let's do it. We go back to the main lobby area and go up and ascend to the third floor. This floor was a little bit more interesting than the second. This was more of the office floor. While it did house some rooms, it appeared there were other things up here, like supplies and offices, things that had been long abandoned. We found some pretty interesting old books that hadn't been touched in a long time. Other miscellaneous medical tools. But again, nothing really too interesting. On one of the rooms that was at the end of the hall, it kind of reminded us of maybe a study room, or a room in which they did speeches. There had been a big pentagram spray painted on the floor. While eerie, there was no blood or any animal bones or anything like that. Probably just some bratty teenagers or something coming in here, trying to be edgy and cool. Who knows? There was also more graffiti on the walls, followed by more garbage. Nothing out of the ordinary. Still, no signs of any evil spirits or anything creepy. other than just this location being creepy as heck. So we go back to the main lobby map and try to figure out where we can go next. Most of it was heavily eroded away, so you couldn't see much, but the map was very similar to the way a mall would display its layout. It was just very eroded and watered down. I don't think any of the writing was really that legible anymore. After my friend studied it for some time, he said, "Hey, we should go check out the sublevel. There's also a sub-basement. That's probably where they keep a lot more supplies and things." So we agreed. We went down to the second floor, made our way down to the first floor, and at the very end of the main east wing, there's a large door that takes you down a long set of stairs. This leads you into the sublevel. Now, this level is when things got kind of creepy. Part of the level was flooded out, actually, so we couldn't explore the whole thing. But there was a boiler room down here and a bunch of other miscellaneous supplies. The feel down in the sublevel was much creepier than the other floors. There was also pretty much no graffiti and no trash, meaning that for whatever reason, people didn't really come down here. I don't know why that is. It looked a lot more untouched and just left to rot. We had to be very careful of the areas of this level that were overtaken by water, because we are in the swamps after all and alligators. So we just made sure to check out what we could. Again, we saw a medical supplies room. There was a boiler room. It's crazy to stumble upon this stuff. I mean, all these things looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Easily probably 70 or 80. And from what I remember reading, it shut down in the 30s or 40s. I think shortly after the Great Depression, if I'm not mistaken. So, after only being able to explore about 40% of this floor, we thought it would be best to go and explore the sub-basement. Now, I want to keep this in mind. Ever since we had come down to the sub-level, things weren't the same. Things felt different. While up on the main floor, the second and third floor, yeah, it was creepy just being in this old abandoned hospital. But it wasn't like it was coming down here. It was colder. There was just a different feel. And not to mention, the lack of graffiti and trash and signs of people being here was definitely creepier. I don't want to outright say it was my paranoia. I mean, I wasn't necessarily paranoid, but it just felt creepier. We made our way to the main door that led to the sub-basement. Now, the sub-basement was led on by a huge set of stairs. Things began to feel a little bit more industrial, but we made our way down, and we finally entered into the sub-basement. Now, I will say here that it was a lot colder down here, and it felt very, very creepy. And not just because we were in a sub-basement. Now down here, there were virtually zero signs of anybody ever being down here. There was zero graffiti, zero trash. At least up in the sub-level, there was a little bit of graffiti and a little bit of trash, but not much. It was practically none. But here, there was nothing, meaning no signs of human life being down here for God knows how long. Maybe there's a reason people didn't want to come down here. All these horrible thoughts were going through my head. There's just something about being trapped in this basement, underground, under this creepy old hospital. But I have to admit, even though the stank was bad, these sights and sounds were pretty cool. The basement wasn't like the other floors, where it was main hallways and lots of rooms. These were more long, single stretches of hallways, with sparse amounts of rooms. After we get to the end of this really long tunnel, or I guess you could call it a hallway, it's split off into three ways. In front of us, to the left, and to the right. After shutting our light down all ways, they seemed to go on for quite a while. We decided to start with the left path first. Going down here proved pretty much non-eventful. There was about 2 rooms which looked like they just held old miscellaneous supplies. There had been water leakage, and one of the rooms was completely flooded out that went down a little deeper in the ground. But again, things looked like they were mostly just supplies. So we walked to the other fork, going down the other hallway, the one that would originally go off to the right. And keep in mind the entire time, while exciting and exhilarating as this was, it was very, very creepy. We go into these double doors, and we see what appears to be an old human skeleton. Or maybe a mummy. Whoever it was obviously died down here. My friends and I are gasping, running towards it, thinking, oh my gosh, is this really a dead person? They were mostly just bone, but still had bits of flesh on them. Very mummified. My guess is that it was a homeless person that had somehow died down here. This creeped both of us out badly. But we thought it would be best to continue on searching more. At least my friend's idea was. I kind of wanted to leave, especially after knowing that somebody died down here, and their actual body was right here. And by the looks of it, they had been mummified for quite some time. Very surprising considering the damp and humid conditions. So, after we get out of this room and head back down to the main fork, I really explained to my friend, look, this has already gotten too creepy, we should probably go. And he tells me, no, come on, let's go check out this third way. Let's at least finish exploring. And down this way, the hallway branched off a few more times, but we decided against going those ways and just continue on straight. Now at the very end of this hall lied a very large supply room yet again, but it looked for the most part cleared out. I will say over in this hallway, things felt even creepier than before, like you just had this feeling like you weren't alone. Unlike the first, third, and second stories, which felt like you were completely all alone and there wasn't anything else there, this sublevel and sub-basement just had a different feeling. Things felt creepier, like you were joined by another entity. Okay, maybe not that exaggerated, but there was something about the air quality down here. It just made everything stand up on end. And we notice at the very end of this hallway, there's a large ladder hatch with what appeared to be service tunnels, I believe. There was writing on the wall with an arrow pointing down that explained what it was for, but due to erosion and time, it was so illegible you couldn't even tell. My friend got really excited saying, dude, we should go down this ladder and see what's down here. But everything in my gut at this point was screaming no. And I'm thinking, okay, fine, you go first. I don't know why I agreed to it. Maybe it was peer pressure, maybe I wanted to be cool, I don't know. But I said yes, and so he opens the hatch. This thing was super rusty, and I'm surprised he was able to get it open. But it creaked and groaned as he pulled back the old hatch cap, and there a ladder descended down below. He shined his light, and it went maybe about 30 feet, till it landed on a concrete landing. My friend, who was more eager than ever, starts to descend down the ladder. He gets about halfway, and immediately stops, and I'm shining my flashlight on him, and he kind of seems panicked. He looks back behind him, since he can't shine his light, because both his hands and feet are on the ladder, and he looks behind him intently. Now, I should say this. As the ladder descends, and as I'm shining the light down on him, he could see clearly behind him and what is beyond the concrete landing. From my ankle, I cannot. So I'm shining my light down on him, and he's looking behind him. And I'm looking at his eyes as he starts to look at something. And then his face changes from curiosity to pure panic, and he starts screaming, flying, ascending up the ladder faster than I've ever seen him. He pulls himself quickly up, and he starts running as fast as I've ever seen him run. As all this is going on, and all this commotion, I could hear something very big start coming down the tunnel, up to the ladder from which he just started descending. Something big had seen him come down the ladder and was coming after him. And whatever it was big and moving very quickly, because as I both run, following him, it starts coming up the ladder, because we can hear it. Whatever it was that grabbed onto the ladder, you could hear the sheer weight and creaking of the old metal ladder. And whatever it was did not have metal boots, because as it came up the ladder, you couldn't hear the ding, ding, ding as somebody ascended with each step. It was just this solid force and the ladder pulling down, of something of great weight going up it. But by this point, we were already running, heading back for the main basement. And as we're running as fast as we can, my friend is still screaming bloody murder, and we could hear this thing behind us, now on the basement level, coming for us. I'm trying to get my friend to wait up for me, but he is not listening, and he gets to the main door that leads up to the sublevel. He pushes it open, and he flies up the stairs to the sublevel. Of course, I'm probably about 30 or 40 feet behind him. He's a faster runner than I am, and I'm trying my best to keep up with him and run from whatever is chasing us. He enters into the sublevel, and I get up there with him. He's sitting there for a moment trying to catch his breath. I reach up to him, grab him, and I'm pulling him. Come on, we gotta go. And we both start running. At this point, I could not hear whatever it was that came out of that hatch following us anymore. But I was not going to turn around and take any chances seeing whatever it is that he saw. So we get up to the main level from those stairs, and now we're back on the main floor. And we just run right on the west wing out the side door that we eventually came in from. And as soon as we make it out, we both just collapse on the hard ground, panting, utterly exhausted, and we keep staring back at the side door, expecting whatever it was to come out. But nothing ever did. In fact, I think whatever chased us never came up to the sublevel. We sat there panting and breathing for probably the next 5 to 10 minutes, just trying to catch our breath. And finally, I looked at my friend, who was very visibly terrified, shaken up, and pale. I have never seen him like this. I asked him, "What did you see? What did you see?" He just kept shaking his head. He wouldn't talk about it. He refused to tell me what he saw. Again, this is behavior that is not like my friend. He's not like this. After maybe a couple more moments, I told him, "Come on, we gotta go." And we finally got back in the car. This event, this exploration, whatever you want to call it, changed him. It shook him up badly. In fact, Mr. Adventure was no longer Mr. Adventure after this. He would now get scared anytime evening would begin to set in, and had no desire to go exploring the swamps and the forests like before. As time would go on and I would get chances to sit and talk to him one-on-one, I keep asking him, "What did you see that day? What was it?" He would just tell me, "I don't want to talk about it." So whatever he saw obviously traumatized him. And I promise you, there's nothing you could say that's going to make any logical explanation. Oh, it was an alligator. It was a bear. We were so deep down in this basement that there was nothing that could have made it down here. Sure, maybe an alligator. But an alligator isn't that big. An alligator is not going to come after you and climb up the ladder. Not like this. Whatever it was had been hanging around in that tunnel, and as soon as it saw my friend descending, it came after him. God only knows what he saw. And I don't even want to think. I've had nightmares about it so many times. The only thing I could really say about it is when I heard it come up the ladder, it sounded far heavier and far larger than any sort of deer, bear, alligator, anything. And I was not about to peek over the hatch and see what was coming up. I was out fly fishing in the bayous, where there was some alligators around. It was a lot of fun. I was out for a good couple hours before I got hungry, deciding to head back. I ended up running into this swampy area, where there were all these trees that covered the sun. It was getting dark and difficult to see, and suddenly, my friend and fishing buddy who was sitting in the boat with me told me to look out towards the swamps. There was something big lurking around in the water. We couldn't make out exactly what it was, but we could see its head kind of bobbing up and down. And I'm thinking to myself, is that a person? No, there's no way. This water's at least 5 to 6 feet deep and full of alligators. But my friend and I would just watch and see this hairy head pop up and down. We were both shocked by this. And after about 15 minutes of observing whatever it is we were observing, it kind of just disappeared. It was moving slowly through the water, kind of the way a big alligator would, but it was definitely not an alligator. Like I said, it was also very hairy. But it was definitely something in the water. It submerged a final time, and we didn't see it again. I can't for the life of me think of any person or animal that would be out here in the water with alligators. I want to say it was a person because the head looked a lot like a person's. Same shape, same facial structure. Although from the distance it was, I didn't get the best look at it. But it really makes you wonder, what's exactly out here in the swamps that we don't know about? What exactly is out here, living amongst the life in the swamps? I think there's something more to it. I don't even want to mention Bigfoot because I'm afraid I'll get laughed at. But sometimes when you're out here all alone, or with friends, and you see things that you can't quite explain, you happen to wonder what the possibilities are really like. When I was in high school, we lived next to some pretty big areas of swamp. A lot of marshes too. It was pretty wet. This is important for the story in just a moment. We had moved there when I was 14. It was in the summertime. And we had moved out due to a foreclosure right before I was about to graduate. So I only ended up living with my parents for a short amount of time before I'd go off to college. And while the first year or so proved to be okay in the new house, I was never a kid that went out back exploring or playing. I mean, I was already 14, so my interests lied in other things like girls and video games and hanging out with friends. But at nighttime in the summer, I'd always remember leaving my window open and hearing the chorus of crickets and other sounds from the swamp. If you've ever lived near a marsh or swamp, you would know it gets pretty noisy, just with all the insects. I never really seemed to mind, but on nights, it would get creepy sometimes. The first thing I remember is that there would be some nights where everything would go completely silent. I would have my window open, sitting there on my phone, and the next thing you know, all the crickets and noises would just stop. It was just this very, very unsettling quiet. But I never paid too much attention to it. And it would always happen sporadically, and only ever at nighttime. Not during the day, not in the evening or morning, at night. Like 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. That's what I mean. Long after the sun had set. Of course, in the summer, because the sun didn't set till at least 9 or 10, it would usually be around midnight. But this happened all year round, sporadically. Now, I'm not writing into you because I saw something, but I had heard plenty of things. All throughout my time in high school, along with the swamps going very quiet, sometimes it would sound like something really big was moving around back there. Like, imagine a rhinoceros walking around on two legs. Just the very heavy boom, boom sound of it stepping around, and the sloshing sounds. Sometimes you would hear a tree being pulled over, or a massive branch being torn off of it. And I know there's no thunder or lightning, so there's no reason that a 12-inch diameter branch should be being torn off a tree. Just really creepy stuff like that. But by far the creepiest was one night when I was sitting there, trying to go to sleep. It was, I think, right before school was starting, so I had my window open. And I don't think I had my fan on. I heard this incredibly loud scream. It came from off in the distance, somewhere deep in the swamp. But it sounded kind of human, except much, much deeper. And you could feel the bass of this thing's scream echoing through the walls. I could feel it in my chest vibrating. I will say that of all the times, that one really scared me. So while there might not necessarily be swamp monsters, I can definitely say there was something back there that I did not want to see or ever meet. This was probably sometime around my sophomore or junior year, because after that, I never heard any more screams, although I would hear those big heavy sounds moving around, the water moving, the things being knocked over, and of course the sounds being completely quiet, but that was about it. It's possible that there were more screams, because I remember, especially during my junior and senior year, my parents got really, really violent with their fighting. And so I spent a lot of nights over at friends' houses and other family, meaning I wasn't home too much, even during the summer. So who knows what I missed that happened outside. For all I know, maybe one of these things climbed up to my house. I don't know. And like I said, shortly after I graduated, my dad lost the house. So the question really begs to be asked. What was back there in those swamps? Creeps me out just to think back on it. My story involves a bit of a tragedy. But it's been long enough now, and I've mourned enough that I feel somewhat comfortable sharing it. So allow me if this takes a couple of days to write out. I'll probably just send this email to you in patches, and you could read the whole thing once it's done. Although I can't promise it'll be very long, so please bear with me. My uncle, whom my entire family was very close with, passed away about 11 years ago now. He was killed by something out in the swamps while fishing. And no, it was not an alligator. He went with a close friend, and while they were out there fishing, they went in separate boats and were probably about 40 to 50 feet away from each other. He says that as he was fishing, the friend claims that as the uncle was fishing, he saw something large rise up out of the water, capsize my uncle's boat, grab him, and rip his leg off his body, before pulling my uncle's body under the water, and that was the end of it. My uncle's friend, completely scared, terrorized, and traumatized by what he had just seen, had fled back to town, alerted the authorities, and they were in to retrieve the uncle's body. Of course, the friend was heavily questioned by what he had claimed he had seen, and was put under multiple psyche evaluations, lie detector tests, tested for substances, alcohol, all of that. But he passed all of it. The uncle's body was found 3 days later. Chunks of flesh missing out all over his body, his leg being torn off just the exact way that the uncle's friend said. After doing a data analysis on his body, the wounds on his body were in no way comparable to that of an alligator bite, or anything that would hint at him being attacked by an alligator. The way the flesh was torn from his leg would prove that something big had grabbed hold and literally pulled his leg off his body, exactly the way the friend had suggested. The friend had claimed that this large, hairy man rose up out of the water and attacked the uncle. He wonders that if this thing or person had been lying wait under the water, and in the right moment rose up and attacked. This only happened about 40 feet away from the uncle's friend, so he saw everything. Grim and gory. The uncle's friend is pretty messed up afterwards. I mean, how could you not be? It was hard enough on our entire family, and I have been grieving on it for years and not able to talk about this. But I wondered, with everybody claiming that once they get this kind of thing off their chest, it helps them immensely. I'm kind of hoping for that same solution. That same emotional resolution for me. I think when we read about my uncle's death in the paper, it was written down as that he had been attacked by an alligator, but we all know that that's not the truth. I'm not saying what it was, or that I believe anything specific, or am even hinting at anything. What I'm saying is that I thoroughly believe my uncle's friend. He's never lied before. In fact, he's a very honest, hardworking man, and he has now have to deal with the mental trauma and memories of what he endured. It's completely ruined his ability to go and fish, and he hasn't fished since that day. Since those memories and vivid experiences attached to it, we now keep his fishing rod, our uncle's, on our mantle in our house, as a memory to celebrate him and his life, since he loved to go fishing. My dad was also very shattered by the news, since my dad and my uncle were extremely close, always had been growing up, which is why our uncle was so close with our family while growing up. I'm 19 now, but was only 8 when we had heard of his death. But if we look past all this and look at what actually happened, I believe that there is some sort of creature that lives in the swamp that did this. Something that did not want him in the water that day. Something that's far more terrifying and deadly than any 15-foot alligator could possibly be, which I understand is hard to imagine something that deadly. I'm not trying to be a storyteller, and I'm not trying to be overdramatic. This is a trauma that I share as well. But what I'm hoping to get from this, what I'm hoping people will take away from my family's trauma, is that maybe going out into the wilderness isn't always the best of ideas. And maybe going out hunting isn't always best, or fishing. When you're taught that you know everything out there in the wild, fishing or hunting, maybe that's not the case anymore. Maybe there's more out there than we know. I don't really know where to end this email, so I'll go ahead and stop it here. Please pray for my family, whoever listens to this. It wasn't easy to even write this out. Thank you to anybody who will listen. New Orleans is said to have its own urban legends, things like the Swamp Man, the Bigfoot, the Dogman, the Rougarou, Honey Island Swamp Monster, and more. But there have also been more and more reportings of swamp-like creatures more than ever. Eyes that glow in the dark, large panther shapes, strange apparitions and mysterious figures, hauntings, and other sorts of terrifying figures lurking in the swamps, lurking in the darkness. In fact, I have a story from an eyewitness that I wanted to share with you personally. Here it is. I was on my way to visit some friends, which was about 2 hours away, at the swamp. It was around 10 to 10:30 p.m., and I got this weird feeling like somebody is watching me or something behind me. So I kept looking back, but nobody was there. But I did notice something in the tree. Now, mind you, it's dark outside and swampy and boggy, so visibility was not too good. When I saw it, it seemed to have a lot of hair hanging off of it, while its eyes kind of glowed. Immediately, my entire body froze up, but then I see this thing jump down from the tree, and all I could do was speed up and drive away, and notice that this thing chased after me, and was faster than any Olympic runner I'd ever seen. But before getting up to my car, it darted off into the swamps and disappeared. I was on my way home to go pick up the rest of my friends that were supposedly coming with me, but I didn't see this thing again, and when I went to go pick them up, I figured it would be better if I didn't say anything. And if anybody knows what I'd seen, please contact me. I'm really curious. This story seems very similar to other sightings I've seen and read. Is it possible that swamp monsters really exist and roam around the swamps? There's already reports, many by the way, of the Honey Island swamp monster. Is that the same thing that this person saw? Or was perhaps this something else entirely? The eyewitness mentions long hair and glowing eyes. That makes me think of a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. And while I can't confirm or deny, whatever this was acted in aggression, running after this person's vehicle, as they said so, and finally darting off into the woods, which would again lead me to believe that this was some sort of bluff charge, probably or possibly driving this person out of their territory, because if they wanted to act aggressively and maim, kill, or hurt, they could have. But it's almost like these beings want to avoid any sort of confrontation in any way they can. There are many other eyewitness accounts of things like this told over and over again, but ultimately I would really love to hear your take on things, because I know you have many swamp stories and things that live in the swamps. Thank you for taking the time to read this, and I would love to hear some feedback and your thoughts and opinions. Also, if you do want to read this, feel free. Just make sure your audience comments what they think it was too. I've been living my whole life out in the swamps, and I've only ever had a handful of times where I've been truly scared. But I'll tell you about one today, actually. This was back when I was in my early 20s. I encountered something I just can't explain what it was. First, some background about the swamps I live in. I live in a very small town on the outskirts of Lake Maurepas. This lies on the Airline Highway, about 30 miles from New Orleans. The only people who live around here are fishermen, hunters, and swampmen like myself. Very little urbanization nearby, except for a few towns with a very small population. We have alligators all over, and while it can be scary to see one of these monsters while you're boating or just flat out looking around, if you know how to keep your distance, you stay relatively safe. Just be sure to not go into their territory. I'll start my story from the summer of 2012, when I first began seeing what I have to tell you about. No, this scary thing was not an alligator or other swamp life. This scary creature was humanoid. One of several nights in a row, I would see these humanoids off in the swamps, and at first I thought they were just men maybe drunk off moonshine or something. But one night, for several nights in a row, there would be a group of them outside my home, making these unnatural, horrible sounds. It made me very frightened and afraid, and the more I saw them, the more scary and unearthly they would be. I even called the police several times to complain about the noise and that there are these things outside my house, but I was always told in retort to stop wasting their time. This is when things started to get really bad. I went out one morning to check on some traps that I had laid in a nearby swamp. These were crab traps, actually. There are people out here who don't exactly know how to fish or crab who will just snatch them up, thinking they're free without realizing that it's illegal to do so. But as I turned, I went and seen some of these swamp people coming up out of the water, wanting to pull me in. They looked even more gross and disgusting than ever seen, looking like a corpse, and the smell alone was intoxicating. I never imagined I would see something like this in the swamps. I even bothered shooting at some of these things, but they would just go right back in the water. And since then, I haven't really gone crabbing or been around to check on the traps. I know this sounds like some crazy, unbelievable story, but I don't know if they're ghosts, I don't know if they're undead, I don't know what they are. But they're these same grayish humanoid figures that will come out of the water and stand by my house at night, scream, making all sorts of terrible noises, trying to break in. I feel like the worst is yet to come, and this has been going on for years now. I just work on my best trying to stay hidden. My encounter takes me back to 1995, when I had just moved outside of New Orleans for a job. I had to be there at 6 a.m. to open up for deliveries. Staying in the city busy with work, it was hard for me to get out and enjoy nature while I could. What better way, though, when an early morning to go hunting? My girlfriend would usually wake me up around 4 a.m., and we would go out by 5. It was during this time that there seemed to be very little alligators in the area that I was hunting. This particular morning, though, it felt as if something was watching me as I hunted. As the sun started to rise, I heard a scream that made my blood run cold. What can only be described as a mix between a lion and an elephant scream echoed all across the marsh. The sound seemed to last forever. I've had encounters with strange things before, even had paranormal things, but nothing has ever scared me as much as this experience did. I have never had my blood pressure go up so high, or my heart beat so fast. Just then, I started hearing something big coming through the swamps in my direction. I could hear a lot of splashing and a lot of branches breaking. I cannot explain the fear that suddenly came over me as I began running back toward my car. As I was running, suddenly, something brown popped up about 100 yards in front of me, going from left to right. At first, I figured maybe it was a large deer, but what I saw was not a large deer at all. It was a massive brown creature. It had to have at least been 8 feet tall, but it was hard to tell. This thing was slightly hunched over and was running on 2 legs. This thing looked at me, and I could see its eyes glistening under the morning sun. The creature ran into a nearby canal that connected to a lake, and I watched it as it swam across and disappeared through a patch of woods. The canal was not very wide, but this creature made it look like an Olympic long jump. I knew immediately what this brown creature was, the same thing that I'd heard the scream from earlier. I stood there for a little while longer, trying to catch my breath, when I heard what sounded like a woman screaming in the distance, very similar to what I just heard from this creature. I was pretty freaked out by this point, so I ran back to my car and drove about another mile down the road, until I received cell phone service. I called up my girlfriend at the time, who lived nearby. I asked her if she can come pick me up. When she arrived, I had her drive me home, until I told her what happened. She didn't believe me. She thought I was crazy. There was no doubt about it, though, because after looking around, there were footprints in the mud that matched clearly what I saw. The prints were so deep they sunk into the ground, almost 6 inches. There were also claw marks on some of the trees. I can't explain how scared I was. I wasn't the same for months after this incident. I was fearful of going back outside at night, especially near swamps or canals. I kept on getting lost, driving around. I wouldn't go near those woods at all, even if I was dared, or if my life depended on it. One day, though, I decided to go see a psychiatrist. I knew something wasn't right with me, ever since this incident. After telling him what happened, he told me there's such things as swamp ape, and the sightings are all over Florida, and sometimes in Georgia and Alabama. He thought maybe that's what I could have saw. So, I'm sharing this encounter in hopes that somebody knows where and what I saw. My name is John. I'm 28 years old now. When I was 14 or 15, my father and I decided that we would take a little trip down to the swamps of southern Louisiana to do some night fishing of our own. We lived in Slidell, which isn't very far from New Orleans. It's about an hour drive through these beautiful, lush swamps. If you know the right roads to take, you get there. Anyway, this particular night fishing trip takes us further southwest than our normal trips do, so we had to leave even earlier than usual, as to not get lost once out there. It gets very dark in those swamps at night, which made it fun for me. Anyway, my dad knew exactly where he was going, so I just had to sit there and chill while he did all the driving. We ended up getting pretty deep in the swamps on this particular night. When we finally arrived at our destination, it was almost pitch black. These are areas of swampland that you wouldn't even be able to see your hand in front of your face if it weren't for the bright white light of the stars. But trust me, even with something like a flashlight, you would still have a hard time making out anything that's right before your eyes, unless you know these swamps like the back of your hand, which my dad does well. So, as we're approaching our destination in the pitch black darkness, I can see a thunderstorm brewing up in front of us. It was awesome. It's one of those storms that you could tell was ready coming at you. But when you checked it out to your left or right, you could see there were just pitch black skies and no clouds whatsoever. Just rain dropping down from the sky like somebody opened up a faucet. So we get our stuff ready, put on them ponchos my dad always kept in his car for these types of situations, just in case. We then proceed into this thick brush that leads into this extremely dark area, surrounded by an endless number of trees covered with Spanish moss. As we're wading through this brush, I could see the silhouette of a big old gator in between the trees in front of us. So, my dad and I decide to change course in order to avoid a possible run-in with it. We somehow managed to find a path through another area, and this looks exactly like the one we just come from. But then, we hear some crunching sounds, like something tearing into flesh and bone, and we turn around and see this humanoid reptilian thing eating a carcass of what appeared to be a deer or some other type of large mammal we could not recognize. The thing looked more like a half-man, half-dinosaur. It was as if this creature came from Jurassic Park, as it had skin which appeared very similar to that of an iguana skin. It stood on its hind legs. Then, once it saw us, kind of let out a screech, running off into the dark brush with an incredibly accelerated speed. The following day, we went back to where we saw this humanoid reptilian creature, and the only evidence we found was the tree branch that had broken off. It had blood all over it, and the carcass that was still there. We could see some very large tracks, too, leading into the thick swamp brush. Large reptilian tracks, easily larger than our own feet, and three-toed, too. Imagine like incredibly sized bird tracks. That's what it looked like. I have even told my own friends about this experience. None of them really believed me, until I showed them the same spot where this happened one day while fishing, just for fun. We had gone there, and I showed them where it all went down. What got me was the only evidence we found were the tracks, but by the time I showed my friends, the tracks were long gone. You know, being out here, you see a lot of things, but I don't know if I could ever catch another creature like that again. Maybe my dad and I just got really lucky. When my friends and I were younger, we would usually go camping every other weekend. It was not exactly legal, but it never stopped us. When this one particular night came around, we decided to go 5 miles into the swamps and set up a small camp. We knew there was a chance of alligators, but we did not bring any food with us or make it known to any of our parents that we were going to be out by ourselves in gator country and very potentially dangerous and hazardous situations. So after sneaking out without being known, we stayed up late that night, telling ghost stories, sitting by the fire. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, my friend Red said he had heard screams coming from inside the swamps. This is past midnight, when they should have been sleeping. He said he's always heard ghost stories and people talk about this parts of Louisiana. Of course, I still did not believe him. He told me that the ghosts of the plantation owners and people who died wander the swamps, looking to claim their next victims. I figured he was just trying to scare me, so I told him that it probably would just been maybe some drunk guy yelling, or somebody out in the distance. He continued telling me his ghost stories, until I virtually passed out from exhaustion. This was right around 3 or 4 in the morning. Finally, at about 6 in the morning, I woke up. Red was wired, sitting there on a log, sharpening his stick with his hunting knife, staring intently at the swamp. He had not slept at all. He was facing the direction, and I noticed he was pale white, like he had seen something that had really bothered him. He looked very unnerved. He looked at me and just said, "We're in the wrong part of the swamp." I didn't quite understand what he meant by that, but before I could even say anything, something very large climbed out of the swamp right behind us. The thing that came out of the swamp must have been at least 10 feet tall when it stood up on 2 legs. After it stood up, I saw that it was covered with black mangy hair all over its body and 4 very long claws on each hand. It had this protruding snout kind of like an anteater, but shorter, and long sharp rigid teeth all the way around. This was something I had never seen before. We were like frozen watching a horror movie, seeing it ascend out of the swamp. We dropped our flashlights and began running as fast as possible, trying to get away from this thing. While we didn't originally camp 5 miles in like intended, we were probably still a good mile away. We went as fast as our legs could carry us, and surprisingly, we made it all the way out. The entire mile while this thing had chased us, barreling through the swamp. This was by far probably one of the scariest experiences I've ever had in the swamps. This was in 1999. My family and I had gone down to Florida for our yearly summer vacation. My mom, dad, and older brother Jeremy and I were at a rest stop on Interstate 75, out in the middle of nowhere. It was right around 11 p.m. We stopped there because my brother needed to use the bathroom. We all got out of the car and went inside with him. It had 2 bathrooms, one male and one female. We used the male restroom. It had 4 urinals and stalls against one wall. Anyway, as we come out, my mom realized she forgot something in the car, walked over to it, and my dad opened up the back driver's side door. He's standing there looking at something, and he says, "What is that?" Staring at us through the back window was what everybody agreed felt like a Bigfoot face. It had no hair on it, black as night eyes you could see, and long sharp teeth just staring at my dad, then standing up on 2 feet, putting its arms out like it wanted to get us or something. But then it kind of just disappeared. I, however, still do not know what this creature was. I have never seen one before, but I know that this was no man. I grew up only about 20 miles away from McElroy Swamp, which is situated near the Honey Island Swamp Monster. That's only about 20 miles away from my house. I've never had an encounter myself, but I do know of more than one person who claims to have seen it. This occurred around midnight in September of 2015. I was speaking with my older cousin, born and raised in the swamps. This is where he would share his story with me. So one night, he had gone out fishing in the swamps. He was with his 2 friends and another family member. They were all in a 12-foot aluminum boat. It was right around midnight, or close to. He had his Bass Pro Shops hatchet and a buck knife. They were paddling and they heard a splash in the water, so they began paddling faster. They had heard another splash, but closer this time. They all looked into the water and saw something big crawling onto the edge of the boat. They claim it was all black, no features. Not really much of a face, but they could see its eyes. They started freaking out and hit the motor. They got back to shore, and the thing was following them right behind them in the water. When they got closer to land, it began climbing out of the water, and when it got to the edge, they could see that it was at least 8 or 9 feet tall, still chasing after them on foot. When they had made it to shore, they all ran for the car, which was about 3 miles away from where they were fishing. The cousin who was driving said he had seen it, slowly, walking towards the edge of the water. There's a dark feeling I listen to when I hear this story. I think it's because of the detail my cousin gives me, or maybe that he is actually afraid of something in the swamps. I was only 10 when I had this sighting. It was the first time I'd ever gone in my backyard swamp. My parents were in bed, and my brother was in his room. I decided to go out for a walk in the swamp that night, since everybody else was sleeping. As I approached the entrance of the trail leading into the swamp, something between a man and a dinosaur stood up from behind a bush on the trail. I froze when I saw this creature that would have been crouching down, drinking from a small pond of fresh water. I was frozen, scared, and a little intrigued as to what this creature was. He, or it, was around 7 feet tall, had human-like features, huge eyes, and a large bald head with a very large jaw. This creature probably saw me but didn't care. He continued to drink from the pond without really looking or acknowledging me. Then, I made my legs move a bit and got a better look at the whole thing again. This time, going back by about 15 feet. I then noticed there were 2 other creatures that looked similar, but were much smaller. They had the same long bald head, huge eyes, and blood running down their faces. But this time, they too were also crouched over in a praying position, while making these strange chattering noises. The 3 of them got up after about 30 seconds and started to walk off into the trees, very calmly. I then forced my legs to move again, running towards the house as fast as I could. When I was about to reach the door, I looked back at the trees, but I couldn't see them anymore. My parents have heard this story over 100 times now throughout my life. Every time they ask what happened that night before bed, it feels like I've had yet another experience, so I tell them the story. This is why I believe those creatures are real, even though everybody else thinks it's all bullcrap. Oh yeah, you saw a lizard man, hoo-hoo. But I'm telling you, I wouldn't make this up. No matter how much anybody says they want it to just be a dream or a lie, it never gets old. It's something I have to deal with now, and I consider it a part of my life. When I was a teenager, there was this very large section of swamp and marsh that I always enjoyed hiking into. I knew to be extremely careful because of snakes and water moccasins and whatnot. My enjoyment of the swamp changed severely one evening when I saw something that is not supposed to exist. It was a late summer evening, and I decided to go hike into the swamp. It's what I love doing. The sun was setting, so it must have been right around 7 p.m. or so, I think. I get off my truck and began walking through the woods towards the swamp. There's a trail of sorts that you take from picking your own way through, filled with fallen trees and old logs, and it leads to a beautiful section of flooded cypresses that I always refer to as the maze. It's supposed to be easy enough for anybody who knows how to walk on ground with not much of a slope, but if you don't know it, you're going to get lost even if you're an experienced hiker, since there are 2 parts where it's difficult to tell up from down. As I was making my way into the maze, all of a sudden, I heard something moving very quickly through the cypress trees towards me. which had this awful sound. I could hear things moving really fast, and I turned around to see what it was. I saw it, standing at about 8 to 9 feet tall, with these glowing amber eyes. The first thing that came to my mind is just how demonic looking this creature looked. Dark fur, all matted together, giving this terrible, unkempt appearance, deep down to its shade of brown and reddish color. Its skin too was also black, and it had almost these charred teeth. They were bits of black, but they were very big, very huge fangs. It was also on 2 legs, but kind of bent forward, but not so much that you couldn't tell it had arms that matched its height. I'm still confused as to why I felt no fear as it slowly approached me. All I remember is how quickly everything was going, and all the thoughts going through my head at one time. But one feeling was prominent. It wasn't one of being scared. It was more like knowing that this thing was in what its intentions were. It didn't make any noise as it walked towards me, almost in a hunched-over sprint or something, just hidden in the swamp's foliage blind spot until you're right up on it. And when I turned around to see what was rustling sound behind me, we made eye contact for about a half second before I realized it clicked off in my brain. I needed to run. Everything around me slowed down, but reflexes kicked in and told me I needed to run now. It was either that, or get eaten alive, or get out of the maze. So that's what I did. I ran for my life through the forest, all covered in shadows from the trees until I found myself back on solid ground, leading up towards my truck, which had an extra gas can in it, because when you go off-roading like I do, it's good to have a spare if needed. And this comes in handy because, well, I was pretty low on gas, and so I wasn't sure if I'd make it out of there. The path itself is mostly marshland, with some dry areas in certain places where people camp at. But there aren't many, except for this one place near an old abandoned plantation house, which is near where most people park. The problem with this spot is there's almost always swamp tour groups coming and going right around sunset. So, if they're still there, it's almost guaranteed that I'm not getting into the swamp, no matter what. Anyway, after about 30 minutes of walking back to the truck, I finally make it and decided to take a different route through the marshlands until I found an area where the road started again, which took another hour or so, just to get the long way around so I wouldn't have to drive through the area with that thing. Safe to say, I've not been back to those swamps since, nor do I plan on going back anytime soon. What happened should stay with me forever. If anybody is thinking of heading out there, don't, unless you plan on dying. If you've ever been to the Honey Island swamp, then I'm sure you've probably heard of the infamous creature supposedly haunting the swamps, right? Well, the Honey Island swamp monster is very alive and real. I'm here to tell you one of my very own sightings of this strange, elusive creature. First things first, Honey Island Swamp is the largest swamp in the US. It spans all the way over to Louisiana, and right now, Honey Island actually has an unknown number of lakes within it. Now, I live on Honey Island, and I love fishing. For this reason, I'm about to tell you. Early one morning, during spring break, last year, my little brother and myself decided to go on a fishing trip down on Honey Island. We packed up the usual supplies, got our rods ready, grabbed our guns, and in case we might see something unusual. We do live near Honey Island after all, and you gotta watch out for wood boogers. So, as we're about halfway through Honey Island, at around 5 a.m. or so, there's still just enough light out to be able to see somewhat well. We're making our way through Honey Island, about a mile or so from the boat launch, and my brother looks off into the brush and says, "Hey, what's that over there?" So I look over to where he's looking, only to be completely baffled by what I saw. There was something huge, this large black silhouette standing there in the undergrowth. It must have easily been over 7 feet tall, judging by where its head is with the branches. It seemed like it had long dark brown fur and these bright red eyes glowing in our direction. We were definitely scared. Now, being a country boy, this didn't exactly scare me per se, although it was frightening, but I tried to hold my ground, emotionally. It felt as if this creature or being was not too pleased with us being out here, and definitely not friendly. Immediately after seeing this, my brother and I decide to book it out of there as fast as we can. But as we're about to turn around and run away from the Honey Island swamp monster, or what I can assume is the Honey Island swamp monster, we heard a loud hissing noise that didn't exactly sound too friendly. So, we took one last look at this thing and then booked it back home. Now, there was no way that we were going to stay out on Honey Island for any longer than we had to. We dropped our stuff off back home, and we hung out inside. So, if you plan on coming to the island yourself anytime soon, be prepared, because the Honey Island swamp monster he's very real, and very intimidating. All I can say is that this monster better be on the lookout. He will not stand a chance against my 12 gauge. It was a beautiful Sunday morning after church, when my wife and I decided to go get lunch at one of our favorite taco truck spots. End of morning, with a drive by the marshlands to watch the wildlife. We never thought we'd see what we did that morning. My wife and I have been married for 8 years now, but we have known each other since we were 15. We both love exploring the outdoors, going off the beaten path, so to speak. It was no surprise that, after seeing all these posts of creepy humanoid encounters in Louisiana alone on unexplained mysteries, she thought it'd be fun to go down by the marshlands since our state is so rich with this particular kind of folklore. We turned onto Bayou Road off of Highway 408, headed west towards San Leon. We drove about 5 miles into the middle of nowhere, and we came upon a sign that read San Leon, 1 mile. The road looked like it went straight through what appeared to be a heavily wooded area, even though it's technically a marsh. We continued on, and the further we drove, the more I just wanted to turn around. There was just something really off about the whole place. As we reached the edge of town, we crossed over a small wooden bridge that went over some large swampland, where the cattails surrounded us. It looked as if we were abandoned from all stretches of the imagination. No people or cars for miles, except for a single house a few hundred feet away from us. The house had a white picket fence out front, and an American flag hanging next to the front door. 2 rocks on each side holding the posts in place. As my wife slowed down to drive past it, she commented on how she thought it would be cute to live there, and it seemed nice and quiet. We continued on further, and the more we drove, the less I wanted to be there. We passed by 2 more houses before seeing anything else. This was kind of out in the middle of nowhere, so we realized by this point we might have gone too far. It was then we spotted something in the distance between 2 of those houses just up ahead. A humanoid figure walking down the road towards us. The first thought that came to my wife and I was an elderly woman crossing the street. But as we got closer and closer, we realized that whatever this thing was drastically out of place. It was not human at all. It stood about 6 to 7 feet tall, with insect mantis-like features, yet humanoid characteristics as well. Its torso had light green scales with 4-fingered hands, just like a humanoid. Its forearms were fully webbed, and it had large black eyes. Its entire body was humanoid except for its face, which consisted of a mantis-like head, an insect-like beak with these 2 large tusks coming down from the side. Besides having large black eyes and these strange insect-like appendages coming out of its face, it looked like it had these horns on its head. My wife immediately screams and she slams her foot on the brakes, trying to bring the car to a stop. I remember just sitting there puzzled, wondering what I was looking at. This wasn't human at all, but it very quickly ran back into the safety of the woods again, right before we reached where it was standing so abruptly. We both just sat there, paralyzed with fear, as my wife slowly crept forward, towards where it had just disappeared too. She wanted to keep driving, but was very hesitant. She did not want us to lose sight of this thing. I finally spoke up, said we should get out of there, that there was something very wrong about this place. Reluctantly, she turned around and we drove back towards Highway 408. What I began to wonder was this some sort of demon? We both wondered for days afterwards. What in the world had we just seen? We both felt a strong sense of dread for days afterwards, and have been very reluctant to explore even closer to the swamps since then. The job I work, which the company's name I'll keep out of this, considering I don't want any loose ties to me and the name of this company. But generally, they have me working late nights. Some days, I only work from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., but sometimes I'll also work from 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. It just depends on what shift they need me for. On this day, I worked a 5 to 5, and was actually driving home in the morning time. So this takes place shortly after 5 a.m. Right after I got off work, cup of coffee in hand, I was fairly alert and driving, ready to get home and unwind after a long 12-hour shift. It was still dark out, and I remember it being either spring or fall, still a little wet, not quite summer, not quite winter. So I also drive alongside a very large bog, so as you can imagine, it gets pretty misty and foggy, especially during the very early morning hours. Now, there was a very thick layer of fog kind of just hanging, lingering in the area, which can make driving conditions very dangerous. I came to a long stretch in which both lanes were covered in water, and there was no solid line through the bog, so this required me to change lanes multiple times, due to the large puddles being everywhere. So I'm going down this road when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, appears this creature from the bog. It climbs up onto the road, looking like some kind of mutated pig or boar with horns on its head and huge claws on its hands. Its skin looks wrinkled and gross and dead, similar to that of an amphibian, except it looked kind of dead. Its eyes were black and had these massive teeth sticking out of its mouth. This thing takes one look at my car, and I'm nearly screaming an exclamation, slamming on my brakes. This thing lets out a hiss and literally leaps across the 2-lane highway into the other side of the bog. The hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up, just staring at this thing. And after it took a few quick leaps, clearing the entirety of the road. I don't know how long this thing was, but I'd have to say it was at least maybe 8 feet tall. And it leapt across 2 lanes of traffic. Crazy, right? This thing gazed into my car with those big black hollow eyes, staring at my face as if it were studying me. It looked as if it were about to lunge at me, or turn around and disappear back into the bog. But instead, it just let out that one nasty hiss, and turned around and, well, it leapt off. Needless to say, that now, I make sure to avoid the bog whenever I could for weeks after seeing this creature. I still don't know what it was, but I swear I will never forget that face, nor the screams that it made when exposing its teeth. I usually don't believe in this kind of stuff, but after living through that encounter, nothing really surprises me anymore. Something else I wanted to add is that after this happened, I ended up telling a coworker just a few days after. Well, I guess he saw a very similar creature too nearby, down the same road, maybe by about a few miles. He claimed that this thing tried attacking his car and nearly pulled away to avoid being killed. I know these things are out there, but what are they? I need to make sure I avoid these bogs whenever I can, because nothing can really prepare you for something like this. I always make sure to keep my guard up, especially when it's dark or foggy outside. Currently, I'm looking into cryptozoology, trying to find out what these things are and what have been haunting my dreams. I was deer hunting several years ago, and like any other hunting season, I was very persistent on getting a good buck to bring back. The meat I get from these lasts me all winter, so it's my main source. I don't really like poultry or beef or any other sorts of animal. There's just something about deer and elk meat that is so lean and so clean. I love having it through the winter. Through this area, I have multiple stands set up all throughout the main swampland that I hunt through, since around here, in the state of Mississippi, deer have been very populated over the last few years. I was out before dawn with my high-powered rifle and flashlight. As I was about to climb down the ladder, I had set up in one of my bait stands when something stopped me dead in my tracks. It was deathly silent. Even the crickets had stopped their chirping, which gave me this ominous feeling like someone or something was watching me. I flashed my light around the main area of the swamp, looking for any movement at all, but nothing seemed to be there. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and goosebumps running down my arms. I decided it would be best to climb down from the stand and just go home. Just before climbing down is when I saw it. I looked over into a small den cavern that was formed by a large cypress tree that had apparently fallen over. I noticed something in there. I cautiously walked into the small cave with my rifle in hand, just to see what it was, even though part of me already knew. As soon as I shined my light on it, its eyes peered at me, followed by the rest of its body. It looked extremely gaunt, hunched, corrupted. It was dead. Whatever this creature was, it had died in the fetal position, but it was all sorts of hideous. This thing was, at one point, a human, but it was pale white, sickly looking. Its mouth was twisted, and its eyes sunken in black. Completely hairless and animalistic looking. Its bones were all long and lanky and broken, protruding outward. Did I mention how pale the skin color was? It was like a grub worm. And it even appeared to have larvae growing underneath the skin. I had never seen such a thing before, but whatever it was had died in here, and must have been recent. I started to feel nauseous just staring at this thing. After a short amount of time, I quickly snapped back into reality and exited this small cave out of fear for my life. I just had this overwhelming sensation of dread, like I should leave now. Once outside, I ran as fast as I could until I reached my truck on the other side of the swamp. I drove home without looking back once. I was done for the day. When I reported my story, it dawned on me that, as scared as I was in this moment in time, I'm more so terrified about not knowing what this creature was. The following day afterwards, I told my brothers and my cousin about what had happened, and to my surprise, they actually didn't laugh at me, but believed every word. I would hope so. I've never been one to make up something like this, nor have I ever. I've always been extremely honest and truthful with everything. And I don't make up stories. I don't need notoriety. I don't care about that. They too had gone to the same location I have. They went to the den cavern with me, and all that was there was now bones, but not of this creature. The creature's body was gone. We also noted that there were large marks on the nearby cypress trees, huge claw marks that were much bigger than a bear, and very, very deep into the wood. These long grooves. This came out inconclusive. We have no idea what was going on here. What creature died in this den? Why? And where was its body now? To think I'm crazy for still going out hunting in the same spot just about every year during hunting season. I can't help myself from thinking about this same creature. Could it be from around here? Are there more of them? What happened to its body? For all I know, people had been seeing some sort of animal like this for years, and they just passed it off as a gaunt-looking man, maybe due to the lack of knowledge on what kind of creature actually inhabits swamps. Now, I've reached out to a few people who will hopefully hear me out. I should be hearing back from them soon. Maybe they too can come and investigate. What do you think about all this? I'll start off by saying that I love and cherish my night walks. I still do. Even after this sighting, they are what keep me sane. There's just something so thrilling about stepping outside and breathing in the fresh night air and unwinding from the day with some exercise. Quick note, I actually moved down here from Ohio to Tennessee 8 years ago on account of a career change in schooling. I live out kind of in the middle of nowhere, and I like to go on these late night walks on the back roads back here. I spend about an hour or so each night out. The night of my sighting was something I still just can't explain. It felt off from the start. There was a frog everywhere. The frogs were going crazy, but this can sometimes feel normal. I didn't think too much of it at first. I started walking back on the trail when something caught my eye down a ways just further. My eyesight isn't the best, but it wasn't just dense fog that was coming up closer to me as I approached it. It seemed to be moving forward, closing the distance even with all the swamp vegetation. Upon reaching maximum proximity, we locked eyes with one another, and in a split second, I saw a massive, scaly head with a long snout full of jagged teeth and a pair of glistening eyes. This was the stuff from nightmares. At this point, I promptly snapped out of my trance, turned on a dime to sprint back home as fast as possible. I didn't look back at it once after that moment, but a quick glance behind me, a few hundred yards away, confirms that it's still standing there, looking at me, running off in the darkness towards home. The only thought going through my mind is, I'm getting new friends tomorrow. This is a new one for sure, though. Nothing like this has ever happened here in the 7-8 years I've lived here. The following days after this event were a nightmare against an entire new backdrop. I usually have a very good sleep routine, but since this has happened, I haven't been able to sleep a wink after dark, or even in a somewhat lit room. It's even gotten so bad that I'm going through a lot of coffee, just to be able to stay up a few hours after the sun sets and get a little work done here and there from home. After that, it all goes downhill. 2 a.m. every single night. I'm a groggy mess, crashing into my bed. If I don't pass out from sheer exhaustion, then whatever is watching me will catch up with me, I feel. I don't have any plans on quitting my walks, though. They still remain a huge part of my life, and a massive source of my happiness. The feeling you get when walking a trail at night is a lot like finding a secret passage out of a book, and the unknown is a nice escape from all the stress of the world. I'll still continue on my walks no matter what, but now I feel that I won't go past a certain point on any given trail. Not with the alligator man still out there. As long as I feel that I stay away from the same area, then it can't do anything bad to stop me, which would be impossible anyway due to its bulk and lack of maneuverability. I would just like to add that I've heard stories here and there of what people refer to as the alligator man. Something or someone that's said to be half man, half alligator, and that is very close to what I saw. While the head appeared to look like a giant alligator, it stood up on 2 legs, with a long tail, short stubby arms. It had stood up in the ditch in the side next to the road, right where the trail ends. And I'm pretty sure that's what I saw. There's no mistaking the identity because, quite simply, there's no other living thing that quite looks like this. But it scared me pretty badly. But as I said, I'm not going to let that ruin anything for me. I'm going to press on and continue to live life happy, full of life, and push on forward through any challenge I can overcome.